She lived in a quiet corner of a busy town where life moved fast for everyone except her. Most people saw her every day but never really noticed her. She would walk the same streets, stand in the same lines, and sit in the same quiet spaces without drawing attention. There was something about her presence that made her blend into the background, like she was part of the scenery rather than the story. At first glance, nothing about her seemed unusual. She kept her head slightly lowered when she walked, not out of fear, but out of habit. Her clothes were always simple and clean, nothing flashy or eye-catching. She didn't speak much unless someone spoke to her first, and even then, her answers were short and polite. People often assumed she was just another ordinary girl trying to get through her daily routine. But what most people didn't know was that her silence was not emptiness. It was something deeper. Inside her, there was a world that never stayed quiet. While the outside world was full of noise, rushing footsteps, and constant conversations, her mind carried something different. Carried rhythm, carried memory, carried music. She first discovered it when she was very young. It was not something dramatic or planned. It started with a sound. One day, she had passed by an old building where a piano could be heard from an open window. The sound was not perfect, but it was enough to stop her in her tracks. She stood there longer than she realized, listening carefully as each note drifted into the air and disappeared into the street. That moment stayed with her longer than she could explain. Even after she walked away, the sound followed her. At home, she found herself tapping her fingers on tables, trying to recreate what she had heard. She didn't know the names of the notes or the meaning of the patterns, but her hands remembered something her mind had not yet learned. Over time, she began to notice patterns in everyday sounds. The ticking of a clock, the rhythm of rain on a roof, the distant honking of vehicles in traffic. All of it turned into something more in her mind. She didn't call it music at first. She just felt it. It was as if the world was constantly speaking in a language only she was starting to understand. But life did not give her many chances to explore it. Her days were filled with responsibilities that did not leave room for dreams. There were expectations to meet, tasks to complete, and routines to follow. Music remained something she carried quietly inside herself, never fully expressed, never shared openly. Still, she found small ways to stay connected to it. Sometimes, when no one was around, she would sit on old benches or empty rooms and move her fingers in the air, as if playing invisible keys. She imagined melodies forming under her touch. In her mind, she was never silent. In her mind, she was always playing. People around her never suspected anything. To them, she was just someone who kept to herself. Some thought she was shy. Others thought she simply preferred being alone. No one asked too many questions, and she never offered explanations. It was easier that way. There were moments when she almost forgot about the music inside her, especially when life became heavy or tiring. On those days, she would feel like just another person moving through the same repeated cycle. Wake up, work, return, sleep, and repeat. But even then, somewhere deep inside, the rhythm never completely faded. It waited. Everything began to shift when she started spending time near a place that changed her life in ways she did not expect. It was a building where music could sometimes be heard faintly through walls. She would pass by it during her usual routine, slowing down just enough to catch fragments of sound. It was not intentional at first, just curiosity pulling her attention. Sometimes she would stop for a few seconds, sometimes longer. She never entered. She only listened from a distance. But even from far away, she could feel something calling her closer. A part of her wanted to step inside, but another part held her back. She did not feel like she belonged in a place where music was made openly and confidently. Still, she kept returning. Not every day, but often enough that it became part of her path. She never told anyone about it. It remained her small secret. One afternoon, as she stood outside listening again, someone noticed her. It was not in a suspicious way, just a passing observation. She was standing unusually still while others moved around her. A simple question was asked casually, something light, almost careless. The question was about whether she could play something simple on a piano, just a basic melody. It was not meant to be a challenge. It was more like a moment of passing curiosity, the kind people use to fill silence. But for her, those words landed differently. A simple melody. On the surface, it sounded easy. Something harmless. Something anyone could try. But inside her mind, those words awakened something that had been quietly waiting for years. She did not answer immediately. She hesitated not because she couldn't, but because she had never done something like this in front of others. The idea of being watched while expressing something so personal made her uneasy. Still, there was no pressure in the moment, just an open space waiting for a response. After a brief silence, she agreed. That single agreement changed everything that would follow. She was guided into the space where the piano stood. The room felt larger than she expected. The air felt different too, as if it carried expectations she could almost touch. People were present, but not too close. They were curious, but not fully aware of what was about to happen. She stood in front of the piano for a moment before sitting down. Her hands hovered slightly above the keys, uncertain but calm. For someone watching from outside, she looked ordinary in that moment. There was nothing that suggested anything special was about to happen. But inside her, something had already begun to shift. The world around her slowly faded into the background. The noise, the faces, the space, all of it became less important. What remained was the instrument in front of her and the quiet rhythm that had always lived inside her. She placed her fingers gently on the keys. And then she played the first note. It was simple at first, just as expected. Soft, controlled, and steady. A melody that matched what was asked of her. Nothing more, nothing less. The room relaxed slightly, as if confirming their expectations. But she did not stop there. Something subtle changed in her expression. Not dramatic, not noticeable to everyone, but enough for a few to sense that she was not finished. Her fingers moved again, slightly faster this time, slightly more confident. The melody began to stretch, to breathe, to expand beyond its original shape. It was still recognizable, but no longer simple. The sound began to carry emotion in a way that made people look up. Conversations stopped without anyone realizing it. Small movements paused. Attention slowly shifted toward her hands. She was no longer just playing notes. She was shaping them. And in that moment, without saying a single word, she began to reveal something no one in that room had expected to see. The next few days passed like any other day in her quiet routine, but something inside her had started to shift. Even though she tried to continue life as usual, she could still feel the memory of that distant music place lingering in her mind. It was not loud or distracting, but it stayed there like a soft echo that refused to disappear completely. She went back to her daily work, her usual walks, and her silent routines. Everything around her looked the same as before. People still passed by without noticing her. Conversations still filled the air in the same casual way. Life had not changed on the surface. But inside her, something small but important had been awakened. She did not fully understand it yet, but she no longer walked past that music place without feeling something. Before, it was just a building with distant sound. Now it felt like something more. Not a destination, not a goal, just a quiet pull that she could not explain. Sometimes she would slow down without thinking, as if her body remembered before her mind did. Still, she kept her distance. She had never been someone who stepped into spaces where she felt unsure. It was easier to stay on the outside, to listen from far away, to imagine rather than participate. In her mind, music was something private, something that belonged to her thoughts, not something to be shared in front of others. But life has a way of changing even the quietest routines. It happened on a normal afternoon when the sky was slightly cloudy and the streets were filled with their usual flow of people. She was passing by the same area again, walking at a steady pace, her thoughts focused on simple things like what she needed to complete that day. Everything felt predictable, almost comforting in its repetition. As she approached the familiar building, she slowed down without realizing it. The faint sound of music was present again, drifting through the air in broken pieces. It was not a full melody she could hold on to, just fragments that came and went with the wind. She stopped for a moment like she had done before, standing slightly away from the entrance. This time, however, something was different. There were people outside the building. Not many, just a small group gathered casually. Some were talking, some were waiting, and some were simply passing time. It looked like a normal gathering, nothing unusual. She considered continuing her walk as she always did. But before she could move, one of them noticed her standing there. It was not a dramatic moment. No one called out loudly or approached her suddenly. It was just a simple glance, followed by a question that came in a calm and casual tone. The kind of question that is asked without much thought behind it. "Do you play?" She hesitated. The question was simple, but it did not feel simple to her. It was not something she usually had to answer. In her world, she was just someone who listened, not someone who performed or showed anything. She looked at the person for a brief moment, unsure how to respond. Before she could fully answer, another voice added something lighter, almost playful. "Just something simple is fine. Even a small melody." Those words stayed with her longer than expected. Simple melody. Sounded harmless, almost easy. But to her, it was not about difficulty. It was about being seen. About being placed in a moment where others would watch her instead of her watching from a distance. She did not give an immediate answer. Instead, she looked toward the building again. The sound inside continued faintly, as if inviting her without directly speaking to her. The group around her did not pressure her. They were not demanding. Felt more like curiosity than expectation. Still, something about the moment made it hard for her to just walk away. She had always avoided attention. Not because she was afraid of people, but because she never felt the need to step forward. Her world had always been quieter, more internal. But standing there, she felt something unfamiliar growing inside her. Not pressure, not fear, but a strange sense of possibility. After a short silence, she finally gave a small nod. It was not a confident decision. It was quiet and uncertain, almost as if she was agreeing to something she did not fully understand yet. But once she said yes, there was no turning back. One of the people gently opened the way for her. The entrance to the building felt slightly different now that she was actually stepping toward it. Before, it had always been something she observed from a distance. Now, she was moving closer, step by step, into a space she had only heard from outside. The sound of music became clearer as she entered. It was no longer just fragments. It was a living atmosphere. The air inside felt different, filled with echoes of notes that had been played before and were still lingering in the space. She paused just inside the entrance for a moment, letting her eyes adjust. The room was not overly large, but it carried a sense of focus. There were people scattered around, some sitting, some standing, all with a quiet sense of expectation. Not expectation of perfection, but of curiosity. They were waiting for something simple, something small, something ordinary. Or at least that is what they believed. She was guided gently toward a piano placed in the center area. It was not overly decorated or dramatic. It was just there, calm and still, as if it had been waiting for someone without knowing who. She approached it slowly, feeling the weight of attention even though no one was staring directly in a harsh way. Every step felt slightly heavier than usual, not because she was unable to walk, but because she was aware of being noticed. This was new to her. In her usual life, she could blend in easily. Here, she could not. She stopped in front of the piano. For a brief moment, she did nothing. Her hands rested at her sides. She looked at the keys without touching them. It was not hesitation caused by fear, but by unfamiliarity. She had never been placed in a moment where silence itself felt like it had meaning. Behind her, the room remained quiet. No one interrupted. No one rushed her. That silence gave her space, but also made her more aware of every second passing. She slowly sat down. The bench felt slightly different than anything she had experienced before. It was not uncomfortable, but it carried a sense of formality. She adjusted her position slightly, as if trying to understand how to exist in this new situation. Her hands hovered above the keys. For a moment, she almost pulled them back. A thought crossed her mind that maybe she should just play something simple and finish quickly. something safe, something expected. That would have been easier. But then she remembered the sound she used to hear from a distance. The music that had always felt like it belonged somewhere just out of reach. And something inside her settled. She placed her fingers gently on the keys. The room did not move. No one spoke. Even the air seemed still. She took a quiet breath and pressed the first note. The first note she played was soft, almost careful, like she was testing the space instead of performing in it. It was simple, exactly what had been asked from her. Nothing dramatic, nothing unusual. Just a clean, gentle sound that filled the room without trying to impress anyone. For a brief moment, everything stayed the same. The people watching remained still, their attention fixed but relaxed. They had expected something ordinary, and that is exactly what they were hearing. A simple melody, played in a calm and controlled way. There was nothing in those first seconds that suggested anything beyond the request. But she did not rush. Her fingers moved slowly across the keys, following a pattern that felt natural to her hands. It was not something she had memorized in that moment. It was something deeper, like her hands already knew where to go before she consciously decided. The sound remained steady, but there was a quiet feeling growing beneath it. The melody she was playing was familiar to many in the room, or at least it started that way. It was the kind of tune that anyone could recognize, something basic and simple enough to be called easy. But as she continued, something subtle began to change. At first, it was barely noticeable. A small pause between notes that felt slightly more thoughtful. A soft variation in timing that made the melody breathe a little differently. Nothing obvious. Nothing that would immediately draw attention. But for those who were listening closely, something felt slightly unusual. She was not just pressing keys. She was listening to them. As the melody continued, her expression remained calm, but her focus deepened. It was as if the outside world had slowly started to fade away, leaving only the connection between her and the instrument. The room, the people, the expectations, they all became distant. What remained was sound and feeling. The simple tune began to stretch in ways it was not originally meant to. She did not break it. She did not change it suddenly. Instead, she gently expanded it, like pulling thread from a fabric without tearing it. The melody was still there, but it was starting to carry something new. A few people in the room shifted slightly, not because anything dramatic had happened, but because they started to feel something they were not expecting. The music was still simple, but it no longer felt empty. It had started to carry emotion. She moved her right hand slightly higher on the keys, adding a soft variation. Then her left hand followed with a deeper tone, grounding the sound in a way that made it feel fuller. The balance between both hands was natural, not forced. It did not feel like she was trying to impress anyone. It felt like she was simply following something only she could hear. The melody grew slowly, like a story unfolding without words. In the beginning, it had been like a quiet walk. Now, it felt like that walk had turned into something more meaningful. There was direction in it. There was purpose in it. And without realizing it, the people in the room began to pay closer attention. A few heads that were previously relaxed now tilted slightly forward. Conversations that had been whispering in the background faded completely. Even those who had not planned to stay long found themselves standing still. But she did not look up. Her eyes remained on the keys. Her focus was unbroken. It was as if she was not performing for the room at all. She was following something internal, something that guided her hands with quiet certainty. The melody shifted again. This time it was not just variation. It was transformation. The simple tune she had started with began to evolve into something richer. She added gentle layers, small changes in rhythm that gave the music depth. The notes were still recognizable, but they were no longer basic. They were becoming expressive in a way that felt unexpected for something that had started so simply. A soft tension entered the sound, followed by release. A rise, then a gentle fall. It was subtle, but it changed how the entire piece felt. People in the room began to notice each other's reactions. Not through words, but through silence. Some stood straighter without realizing it. Others placed their hands still, as if afraid that movement might interrupt what they were hearing. She continued without pause. Her hands moved with growing confidence, but still without force. There was no visible struggle, no hesitation. Everything felt smooth, almost effortless. Yet the complexity of what she was doing was quietly increasing. The melody that had once been simple was now carrying layers of sound that felt carefully woven together. It was no longer just a tune. It was becoming something alive. And still, she did not look at anyone. It was as if the room did not exist in the way it normally would. There was no audience in her mind. No expectation. No pressure. Only sound, memory, and emotion. The transformation continued. The rhythm shifted slightly again, this time introducing a more flowing structure. The notes began to move in patterns that were no longer predictable. They were still controlled, but they carried a sense of freedom, like water finding its own path. The original melody was still there, but it had become something else entirely. It was no longer just a simple request being fulfilled. It had turned into something deeper, something that felt personal even to those who were listening. A quiet change spread across the room. People who had initially expected a short, simple performance now found themselves fully engaged. They were not just hearing the music anymore. They were feeling it. It was subtle, but it was real. Some leaned slightly forward without realizing it. Others held their breath for moments at a time. The atmosphere had shifted, though no one could say exactly when it had happened. She remained completely focused. Her hands moved with a rhythm that felt both controlled and free at the same time. Each note seemed to follow the last with purpose, yet there was a natural unpredictability to it that made the music feel human in a very real way. The melody deepened again. There was a moment where the sound softened, almost like a pause in emotion, a brief stillness within the flow. It felt like a breath being taken before something important. The room remained silent, waiting without knowing it was waiting. And then she continued. The next sequence was slightly more complex. The harmony expanded, the tones became fuller, and the emotional weight of the music increased. It was still not loud or dramatic, but it carried a presence that could not be ignored anymore. At this point, the difference was no longer subtle. Even those who had only expected a simple tune could now feel that something unusual was happening. The music had moved beyond expectation. It was no longer just a demonstration of ability. It was becoming something closer to expression. And yet, she remained calm. Her expression had not changed much from the beginning. She was not smiling, not frowning, not reacting in any dramatic way. She simply continued, as if she was only following what already existed within her. The melody continued to evolve. Each note seemed to build on the previous one, creating a growing sense of depth. It was no longer just about playing correctly. It was about shaping something that could not be fully described with simple words. The room was completely silent now. No movement, no whispers, no distractions, only sound. And as she continued to play, something in the atmosphere began to shift even further, though no one yet fully understood what they were witnessing. The room had already grown quiet, but now it felt like even the silence had changed. At first, it was just a simple performance, something people thought would last only a few moments. But as she continued playing, the music no longer stayed in its original form. It began to stretch, expand, and shift into something far beyond what anyone expected from a simple melody. Her fingers moved with steady calm, but the sound they created was no longer simple at all. It was becoming something layered, something deep, something that carried emotion in a way that could not be ignored. The people watching started to realize that what they were hearing was not just a basic tune anymore. It had turned into something alive, something that seemed to breathe with every note. And yet, she still showed no signs of trying to impress anyone. There was no dramatic movement, no exaggerated expression, just quiet focus. But inside the music, everything was changing. The melody she had started with was still there, somewhere beneath the surface. But now it was wrapped in new patterns, richer tones, and unexpected turns. It was as if she had taken a small thread and slowly woven it into a larger, more beautiful design without breaking its original shape. Some people in the room exchanged quick glances, unsure if others were noticing the same thing. No one spoke, but their expressions said everything. Something unusual was happening in front of them, and it was growing stronger with every passing second. Her left hand began to move more confidently, creating deeper layers of sound. The right hand responded with soft, flowing notes that seemed to float above it. Together, they built a balance that felt almost natural, as if the piano itself was responding to her touch. The sound was no longer just music. It was emotion. It was memory. It was something that felt far too large to belong to a single moment. The atmosphere in the room shifted again. People who were sitting relaxed now leaned slightly forward. Those who were standing stopped shifting their weight from one foot to another. Even the smallest movements faded away. It was as if everyone had silently agreed not to disturb what was happening. She did not look up. Her eyes remained fixed on the keys, but her focus was somewhere deeper. It was not just about playing anymore. It felt like she was communicating with something that only she could understand. Each note seemed to carry meaning, even if that meaning could not be put into words. The melody grew stronger, then softer, then stronger again. It rose and fell like waves, pulling the attention of everyone in the room without force. There was no loudness, no sudden impact, but there was a growing intensity that could be felt in the chest, in the silence, in the stillness of the air. A few people realized they had stopped blinking for long moments, completely absorbed in what they were hearing. And still, she continued. Something strange was happening now. The simple melody she had started with was almost unrecognizable, yet it was still connected to its beginning. It had transformed without breaking, like a single idea evolving into something far more complex. Her fingers moved faster for a brief moment, then slowed again, creating a rhythm that felt unpredictable but controlled. The balance between structure and freedom was perfect, even though she was not visibly trying to achieve anything specific. Felt natural, almost too natural, as if she was not creating the music, but discovering it as it already existed somewhere within her. The room seemed smaller now, not physically but emotionally. The music filled every corner, leaving no space for distraction. Even the faint sounds from outside felt distant, as if they belonged to another world. A soft shift in the melody caught attention again. The tone changed slightly, becoming more emotional, more reflective. It was not loud or dramatic, but it carried a weight that made people feel something they could not fully explain. Some felt calm. Some felt surprised. Some felt a quiet emotion rising without warning. But none of them looked away. She moved into another section of the piece, and this time the transformation became even more noticeable. The sound was no longer just evolving. It was unfolding in layers, revealing depth that had not been visible before. There was a moment where the melody paused slightly, not a full stop, but a gentle hesitation. It felt like a breath held in the middle of a sentence. The silence during that moment was so strong that it almost felt louder than the music itself. And then she continued. What followed was a more complex arrangement of notes, but still incredibly smooth. There was no chaos in it, no confusion. Everything had a place. Every sound seemed carefully connected to the next, forming a flow that was both structured and free at the same time. The audience did not realize it, but they had completely stopped reacting outwardly. There were no whispers, no movements, no distractions. Only attention. Full attention. The kind that only happens when something truly unexpected is unfolding. Her expression remained unchanged, but something about her presence felt different now. Not in a visible way, but in the way she carried herself while playing. It was as if she had entered a space within herself that no one else could access. The music grew richer, more emotional, more detailed. It began to feel like a story without words, where each note represented something unspoken. Could have been memory, or feeling, or something deeply personal. But whatever it was powerful enough to hold an entire room in silence. The melody rose again, reaching a point where it felt almost overwhelming, but still controlled. It never lost balance. It never became messy or unclear. It remained beautifully structured, even as it grew more intense. Some people felt a slight shift in their breathing without realizing it. Others felt a quiet emotional response they could not explain. But no one moved. No one interrupted. Even those who had initially expected something simple now understood they were witnessing something far beyond that expectation. And still, she kept playing. Her hands moved with increasing confidence, but not speed. It was not about playing faster or louder. It was about depth, about emotion, about building something that could not be measured in simple terms. The melody now felt like it was speaking directly to the room, though no words were used. It was communicating something that everyone understood differently, but felt in the same way. And just when it seemed like the music could not go any further, it shifted again, into something even more unexpected. The music had already taken over the room, but now something deeper happened. It was no longer just a performance that people were watching. It had turned into an experience that everyone inside the room was silently living through together. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the smallest sound felt like it would break something important. She continued playing, still calm, still focused, but the music had reached a level where it was no longer simple to describe. What started as a simple melody had now become something far beyond that request. The notes filled the space completely, and yet they never felt heavy. Instead, they felt layered, like they were carrying emotions that were slowly unfolding one after another. It was as if the piano was no longer just an instrument. It had become a voice, and she was the one guiding it. At first, the people in the room had expected something light and quick. A short performance, maybe polite applause, and then the moment would end. But now, no one was thinking about when it would end. No one even wanted to think about it, because something about the music had pulled them in completely. A quiet stillness spread across the room. Not the kind of silence that feels empty, but the kind that feels full. Full of attention, full of emotion, full of something unspoken. Her hands moved with steady control, but the sound they created felt anything but controlled in a mechanical way. It felt alive, like it was being shaped in real time, reacting to something invisible that only she could feel. The melody rose again, slightly stronger this time, and a few people in the room felt an unexpected reaction. It was subtle at first, a tightening in the chest, pause in breathing, a feeling that something important was unfolding in front of them. No one said it out loud, but it was clear everyone was feeling something beyond expectation. The music had changed from simple sound into something emotional, and it was growing. She did not look at the audience even once. Her focus remained completely on the piano. It was as if everything outside of her hands and the keys had disappeared. There was no room for distraction anymore. The melody shifted again, becoming softer for a moment. A gentle pause in energy, like a quiet breath in the middle of a deep conversation. That softness made the room feel even more silent, even more attentive. And then it slowly built again. This time, the change was more noticeable. The notes carried more depth, more feeling. It was no longer just about technique or skill. It felt like something personal was flowing through the sound, something that could not be easily explained. Some people in the room began to realize they were not just listening anymore. They were feeling. The music was no longer separate from them. It was affecting them in a quiet but powerful way. Each note seemed to reach into different corners of emotion, touching memories, thoughts, or feelings that had nothing to do with the present moment. And still, she played on. Her hands moved in perfect balance. The left hand grounding the rhythm, the right hand carrying the melody, both working together in a way that felt completely natural. There was no struggle in her movement, no hesitation, only flow. It was as if she had stepped into a space where everything simply aligned. The melody began to rise again, this time with more intensity. Not loudness but depth. The kind of depth that makes silence feel heavier between notes. The kind that makes people forget to shift in their seats. A few people looked at each other briefly, as if silently confirming that they were not imagining what they were hearing. But even those small glances quickly faded. No one wanted to break the moment. The sound had become too important, too present, too real. She moved into a new part of the melody, and something unexpected happened again. The flow of the music shifted in a way that felt almost like a story changing direction. It was not sudden, but smooth, like turning a page slowly in a book that you do not want to end. The room remained completely silent. Even the air felt still. There was no tension, but there was intensity. A quiet kind of intensity that builds slowly and holds attention without force. The music now had layers that could not be ignored. It was no longer simple. It had become rich with detail, emotion, and movement. Each note felt carefully placed, yet completely natural at the same time. And still, she showed no sign of effort. Her expression remained calm, almost distant, but not empty. It was focused in a way that suggested she was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere deep within the sound she was creating. The audience, however, was fully present. Every person in the room had been pulled into the same shared silence. No phones, no whispers, no distractions. Just listening. A few people began to feel something they did not expect. A quiet emotional response that could not be easily named. It was not sadness or joy alone. It was something in between. Something deeper. The music had started to reach places words could not easily go. And it kept growing. The melody rose again, slightly stronger, carrying more energy than before. But it never became overwhelming. It stayed balanced, like it knew exactly how far it could go without breaking the feeling it was creating. Her fingers moved with increasing confidence, but still without force. Everything remained smooth, controlled, and natural. It was clear she was not struggling to keep up with the music. Instead, she was fully inside it. At one point, the sound softened again, creating a moment of quiet reflection within the performance. That brief softness made the room feel even more attentive. It was as if everyone was holding their breath without realizing it. And then the music returned, fuller and deeper than before. The emotional weight of the performance continued to build. It was no longer just about sound. It was about connection. A connection between the music, the performer, and the people listening. Even those who had entered the room casually now felt completely absorbed. There was no thought of leaving, no awareness of time. Only the moment existed. She continued playing, moving through the melody as if it was guiding her rather than the other way around. Every shift in tone felt meaningful. Every pause felt intentional. Every rise in intensity felt natural. The room had become a single space of shared silence and attention. And still, no one knew what would come next. Because the music had not yet finished revealing what it was capable of. The room was no longer just quiet. It felt frozen in time. Every person inside had completely forgotten the world outside. There were no phones in mind, no small talks, no distractions. Only the sound remained, and even that sound now felt like it was slowly guiding everyone through something they did not fully understand but could not look away from. She was still playing. Her hands moved across the keys with a calmness that almost felt unreal. There was no rush, no hesitation, no visible effort. It looked less like a performance and more like she was following something that already existed in the air. Something invisible that only she could hear. The melody had reached its deepest point now. It was no longer building upward. Instead, it had entered a space where everything felt connected. Every note carried meaning. Every pause felt important. Every soft sound seemed to hold a quiet emotion inside it. And yet, even in its depth, it never became chaotic. It remained balanced, controlled, human. The audience did not move. Not even slightly. It was as if the room had agreed silently to exist only in that moment. No one wanted to break it. No one even thought about breaking it. She continued playing, and slowly, the energy of the music began to shift again. Not louder, not faster, but softer. It was a gentle change, like the music itself was starting to settle after telling a long story. The strong emotional waves that had filled the room moments earlier now began to calm. The intensity did not disappear, but it transformed into something quieter, more reflective. The melody felt like it was saying goodbye, but not in a sudden way, in a peaceful one. A few people in the room felt something subtle in their chest, a feeling that could not be clearly named. It was not sadness exactly. It was not happiness either. It was something in between, something that felt like understanding without words. She did not look at anyone. She never did. Her eyes remained on the piano, but her expression had not changed much from the beginning. Calm, focused, steady. Yet now, there was something slightly different in her presence. A quiet stillness that matched the slowing music. The notes became fewer. More space appeared between them. Each sound now felt more important because of the silence around it. And then, slowly, the melody began to return to its beginning. The transformation that had taken place earlier was now gently reversing itself, but not in a way that erased what had happened. Felt more like coming full circle, like the end was quietly connecting back to the start. The audience slowly realized something. The simple melody they had heard at the beginning was still there, but now it carried everything that had been added to it. Every emotion, every shift, every depth. It had not been replaced. It had been revealed. Her fingers moved more slowly now. The intensity was gone, but the meaning remained. The sound softened further, almost like a whisper in the air. It filled the room gently without demanding attention, yet no one could look away. Even the smallest movement in the room felt impossible now. No one wanted to interrupt what felt like the closing of something important. The final section of the music was approaching. She played a few last flowing notes, each one spaced carefully, each one carrying a sense of completion. The melody was now fully calm, like water settling after a long wave. And then it happened. She pressed the final note. It was soft, simple, and completely still. The sound stayed in the air for a moment longer than expected, as if the room itself did not want to let it go. And then, slowly, it faded into silence. But that silence was not empty. It was heavy with everything that had just happened. For a few seconds, no one moved. No one spoke. No one even seemed to breathe normally. It was as if the entire room was trying to understand what it had just experienced. She kept her hands on the keys for a moment longer, then gently lowered them. There was no dramatic reaction from her. No smile, no bow, no attempt to draw attention. She simply sat there quietly, as if nothing unusual had taken place. But for everyone else, everything had changed. A soft wave of realization began to spread through the room. What had started as a simple request for a basic melody had turned into something far greater. Something that could not be easily explained or repeated in the same way again. Some people slowly began to look at each other, still unsure if what they felt was shared or personal. But the expressions on their faces confirmed it. They had all witnessed the same thing. A few moments passed in silence before any movement returned to the room. Then slowly a soft reaction began. Not loud applause at first, but small signs of appreciation. A few gentle claps. A few nods of disbelief. A few quiet words exchanged under breath. It was not a celebration. It was respect. Deep, quiet respect. She stood up slowly from the bench. Still calm. Still quiet. Still unchanged in appearance. She gave a small, almost unnoticeable glance around the room, not to seek attention, but simply acknowledging the space she had just been part of. Then she turned slightly as if preparing to leave. That was when the reactions grew a little stronger. Not loud or overwhelming, but more present now. People were no longer holding back their response. The appreciation became clearer, though still controlled, as if no one wanted to disturb the emotional balance that still lingered in the air. She did not react much to it. She simply walked away from the piano. Step by step, she moved out of the center of attention, returning to the same quiet presence she had always carried. There was no change in her expression, no sign that she considered what had just happened as something extraordinary. But everyone else knew it was. As she exited the space, the sound of applause slowly faded behind her. The room remained filled with the memory of what had just taken place. Even after she was no longer visible, the feeling stayed. People did not rush out. No one immediately returned to normal conversation. They stayed for a moment longer, as if trying to hold onto something that could not be repeated in the same way again. What they had witnessed was not just skill. It was expression. It was emotion. It was something rare enough that it stayed in silence even after the sound ended. And somewhere beyond that room, she continued her quiet life, unchanged on the surface, while the memory of that moment remained alive in the minds of everyone who had been there. A simple request, a simple melody, that had turned into something no one would forget.